Little Prince is the kind of book that doesn't need an introduction. I feel like anyone that likes to read has read it, and
That's true.
anyone that hasn't read it should.
Sure.
There's so many pieces to it that we're probably not going to do it justice, but we can take a crack at
We
it.
can try, right? We can try.
Yeah.
I mean, I think it's an interesting story how you, like, I was introduced to The Little Prince because of you. Like, and it's weird because later I end up finding out that my mom actually read this to me as a kid in Spanish, in Principito, pero I didn't realize it. I don't remember at all, you know? But you're the one that introduced it to me.
I could be wrong, but it might figure in one of the most translated books in history. Obviously,
Really?
after the Bible and some of those other major ones, but I think it's like in the top 10.
Oh wow!
Originally, it's French. It was written in French, but it's been translated a lot over the years. I wish we had that data here in front of us, but I think it's one of the most translated books. And honestly, we can start a conversation just with the introduction or the dedication that the author gave.
Honestly, I agree. I highlighted some points just at the introduction of this. Let me open it through my book here. Yeah, you're welcome to start.
It says dedication to an adult when he was a little boy, which is kind of encompasses one of the themes of the book, of that growing up versus remaining a child theme, right?
Yeah.
Everyone, when you're young, including myself, we want to grow up. We want to make adult decisions. And then when you grow up, you realize it was a trap.
We've been played.
In the author especially, you can see how this transforms kind of like into some form of guilt.
Mm-hmm.
And the dedication, he opens up with that. You know, like he says that he's dedicating it, but then he asks for forgiveness to all children for dedicating it to an adult. So then he changes it up and says, when he was a little boy. Do you think that this guilt that the author seemed to have, or at least that I perceive he had, about maybe growing up or maybe giving up on some of those childhood dreams, translates or transfers into the rest of the book? Or do you think that was just kind of the beginning?
I think so. I mean, again, just a little side note, we're not professionals in how we're breaking this book down. But I think so, because every person from every planet, I feel like, could easily be like a persona that you try to achieve in life, or a sliver of who you are or who an adult is in life, all of them compiled as one. But it's broken down by planet. And I just feel like this this introduction that he has to the book, it just acknowledges that. I think that it does. I think he acknowledges that. I think this is like his gift, like, well, he mentions like a gift to himself of like forgiving himself. Like maybe I grew up too fast, or was focused too much in growing up. But hopefully with this children's book, I can educate further kids to maybe not take life so seriously. Or, I mean, there's so many lessons to it, not just that topic, but that's what I think. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the pilot in the book, we're introduced to the pilot and the Little Prince in the beginning. And the book doesn't kind of have this linear narrative, because then we find out that the Little Prince has been on this journey that's taken him to Earth, kind of like as a last pit stop. But he's been in other planets exploring. A lot of them have been much smaller than Earth. And now he's here with this pilot that's stranded in the Sahara Desert, trying to fix his machine. And then we encounter this. I mean, to me, it seems kind of like the pilot having this form of, maybe not vision, but thinking back to his childhood. Like the Little Prince makes him meditate on maybe his first drawing, as he illustrates how he gave up on a career being an artist when he was told that his art wasn't good. But it was his first one. It was the first time he drew anything.
He gave up so fast. Yeah.
That's and the true. Little Prince, you know, he gives us one of his many short little quotes that I've enjoyed so much over the read. And it's, grown-ups never understand anything for themselves. You know, they always need figures or data or information or extra stuff. Whereas a child, is that naiveness? Is that like lack of experience? But they usually take things at face value. I feel like, right? Like if you tell them let's go play soccer. Let's go play soccer. They don't need
It's not complex.
all
Yeah.
that extra information.
Yeah. It's a good point. I didn't think about it that way. I do think that he's trying to focus on how fast he gave up and how he allowed other people's influences to give up on a big dream that he had just because of a bad opinion. But you're right. I think children just don't care. They're just like, and I think that's what he's trying to teach. Like, if you enjoy it, I think that's what matters. I think that's kind of like what I got from it. And also the imagination of it, because even if you look at the drawing yourself, you could easily say like, well, that doesn't look like what he's trying to describe, I guess. But it makes you have to imagine it. You have to have imagination. I think, unfortunately, as adults, you use your imagination less and less and less because we have entertainment. Like almost other people are imagining for us, and I think that's the beauty of reading because it forces you to use your imagination because you can't visualize whatever you're reading.
And where do you fall on this spectrum personally of, this idea of remaining a child or having some childish qualities or being and keeping alive your inner child versus growing up, becoming an adult? Like, because it's kind of a spectrum, right? You don't want to be a child if you're an adult. Like that's not going to be good. But at the same time, if you give up all of those things, especially all those dreams, all those things you enjoyed when you were little, and you become this kind of maybe narrow-minded adult that the Little Prince is kind of warning against, maybe that's bad too. Like, what do you think?
Yeah, I think that's something I've struggled with because I feel like, I don't know what, but for a long time I feel like a lot of people have tried to make me grow up. Like I'm not as serious. Maybe people around me that were like applauded for being like good people or whatever. Like they compare to me and I wasn't nothing like personality wise like them. It made me feel like this frustration of like, that looks boring. Like, why do I want to be that? But that person that people are applauding as being serious or mature is being applauded. So there's like this internal fight where you're like, well, why is this person being acknowledged? But I think it's boring or not fun. And maybe I can become that and maybe I'll get those applauds, but then I sacrifice my enjoyment and my happiness. So like, I think I've always had that battle of trying to be balanced of like, well, you can't take everything, life as a joke, but also like, don't take yourself that serious either. Cause I don't think you enjoy life as much, or at least that's my opinion. I don't know. Those people that live that way maybe enjoy life a lot, but in my perspective, I felt like taking yourself too serious holds you back. Because I think if you take yourself too serious, it's almost someone else is controlling your decision. It's not you. It's because of what other people think about that action that's stopping you, more than you decided that you don't want to do that thing, whatever that thing is.
Yeah, I mean, in the book, one of the many stories we find is one of an astronomer. He discovers an asteroid. I forget the name of the asteroid. It's a B395 or something like that.
Yeah.
And when he discovers this asteroid, he gives a presentation. But he made the mistake, or was it a mistake? I don't know, of giving the presentation wearing a Turkish costume. Did you remember that part?
Yeah, I remember.
And in it, no one took him seriously.
No one took him
probably
seriously.
thought, yeah, this guy's not smart enough.
Mm-hmm.
But then years later, it seems like that astronomer gave that same presentation wearing an elegant, suit, probably, more than likely. And everyone applauded his intelligence. And that's kind of, I feel like that's kind of what happens with children. Like, we keep applauding the growing up part. The smarter they are, the faster they become. And, the little silliness of being a child doesn't get applauded. In fact, it could sometimes get reprimanded or you get in trouble. Stop being a child or grow up. Come on.
Yeah.
We're here. Sit down, pay attention. And those are more adult qualities. The ability to just sit down in a place and pay attention to a talk or something like that. Is it something that a child inherently has? But we kind of draw it away from them just to kind of fit in society. Society demands them to not jump on a table and dance.
Yeah,
But at the
and
same time, you can never go back. It doesn't really. You never go back to being a child fully.
and I think that's the balance that I think that this is the key, right? Like I think it's understanding a place because, like, for example, that illustration of like, of him wearing different clothing and how that changed the perspective of how the information was being received. I think that's correct. I think there's a time and place when to be serious and whatever. But I don't think that's that you shouldn't be wearing that mask all the time. Is my point. I think there should be a time where you take the mask off and you're comfortable, whether that be with your family, close friends, whatever. But I think everyone should have the opportunity to take that mask off. But I think a lot of people feel like they can't. Like they feel like they'll be judged. Like they won't love me because they fall in love with that mask. So they don't take it off, but like internally they're like struggling with happiness because of it, because they have this mask on that isn't truly them. It's something they are, like they can put on, but it's not them naturally. And like when you brought out that story, it reminds me of the geographer a little bit, of how he took he's one of the people on a planet. He has his own planet, and he has his geographer that takes notes of a beautiful world that he lives in. But the little prince asks him, where you've been. Have you gone here or there, this ocean or that mountain? And he's like, oh, no, that's not my job. That's the explorer's job. And I resonated with the explorer than the geographer, but I do think a lot of people are the geographer. They feel like, based on whatever metric, whether it's financial metrics, societal metrics of importance, of power, they feel like, well, I don't know, a lawyer wouldn't be doing that. He wouldn't be playing in the rain, even though internally he wants to, maybe, or whatever. A doctor wouldn't be making that type of joke, or whatever. I feel like a lot of people hold themselves back because of these titles or the concept of what that title looks like. And I thought that was that planet is something that I resonated with, because I feel like the lesson I got from it is that knowledge without experience is it doesn't matter. It's incomplete, even if you have the knowledge. But if you don't get to explore those places you've learned, then have you really fulfilled whatever role that is?
Yeah.
That's like, I think, one of my favorite planets. I think that I got the biggest lesson
The
from.
geographer. It's funny you mentioned the explorer or the exploration, because this idea of exploration is another theme on the book, right? The Little Prince, if you think about the way he learns, or the way he tries to find out this information regarding the problem he's having at his home planet, this rose that's kind of causing him some issues. So he goes and finds the planet, trying to find the solution. And he's exploring, and that's the way he's learning.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas, maybe day to day, we've grown learning that the best way to learn is just maybe reading, maybe just sitting down in a classroom, listening to someone. What do you think the future, like, do you think the way that the Little Prince is learning kind of tells you maybe the best way that children, or maybe we as adults, can learn, which is by exploring, by going, maybe even traveling and seeing these lessons firsthand?
I think so. I do think that this topic is probably a heavy debated topic, because it's like the topic of college versus go to work right after high school, right? I think that's kind of like the themality of what you're bringing up, of like my opinion on it. I do think there's certain skill sets that, of course, like, no, go to school. Like, if you want to be an engineer, a doctor, you need to go to school. Like, you do. Like, there's no, there's nothing around it, unless you're gonna go kill somebody as a doctor in a third world country. Like, there's no way that you can go through it without hurting somebody. But I do think that if you don't know what to do, you don't know what you enjoy, or maybe you enjoy too many things, I do think there's a value of doing it, because you don't have the responsibility or the weight of either student loan debt, or the pressure of just having this paper that says that you're qualified for this, and you feel like you can only do that. Like, you put yourself in a box, and you feel like if you go outside the box, you failed. Like, Like, oh, it was for nothing. But that's not true. I don't agree with that either. I think that's an extreme. I think it's not a failure. I think any learning, any schooling is good. I think you learn, it's good. I think that in my case, I don't, in our cases, our families don't have the financial resources to support someone going to school. We're going to be in student loan debt. So I think that for someone like in my shoes, personally, I think doing it, trying it out is the best option, especially if you don't know what to do, because it's heavy burden. But I think that the explorer learns faster because he fails faster. And I think that going to school postpones failure a little bit. And then once you do fail, that failure feels heavier, even though it's the same failure. It's because there's more time invested in whatever you learned that held you back. But that's how I feel. I don't know. How do you feel? Do you feel like there's a best way? I do think it's like case to case almost.
Well, I personally feel like the way our education system works, some lessons take, like you mentioned, this time to mastery, or this time until you learn something, just gets prolonged. And the more, if you discuss something and you talk about it, you might start getting this feeling that you know it. But then once you're actually doing it, you realize, what I talked about maybe wasn't what I'm actually doing here,
Yeah.
And that could be like being a mechanic, right? If you're a mechanic and you talk about parts of a car, or, how to do certain processes, of course it's going to provide you a lot of value.
Mhm.
But if you actually just open up the car and try to do these things and figuring it out and kind of going on YouTube, I know that you like to do that,
I mean, because I'm cheap.
And eventually, maybe you don't know the names of all the parts and all these technical stuff, but you've practiced it and you know how to do it. And I feel like The Little Prince, well, I mean, that's another question. Like, who do you kind of relate to the most? The pilot that's lost there? It kind of, to me, represents someone that had those childhood dreams. And, if you can see the reason that The Little Prince kind of talks to him the most is because probably he had some childhood qualities. And the pilot kind of is forced to admit, maybe I'm a little too grown up. Maybe I have become older as well. Because he's dealing with this problem of his plane not working, and he wants to focus on that. But then The Little Prince comes around. What do you think you are, like, at this stage in your life? Have you been able to be more like that little prince, that kid that's exploring and trying to find the solutions to his issues and his problems in his life? Or do you feel like you're just the pilot stranding in a desert, trying to fix your problem because you need to get away and go back to your life?
I think that's like the forever journey. I think I've jumped around from feeling from the Little Prince to the pilot to the Rose sometimes, that I selfishly wants all the attention, or just love me. But I feel like I tend to be more like the Little Prince, like questioning everything, acknowledging after the fact when you're like, I did have it better than I thought. Like sometimes in our act, our current reality, we feel that our situation is the worst, or it's really hard. But then in retrospect, it was hard. That doesn't take away from it, but there's some good in there. And I think that the Little Prince learns that throughout this journey of like valuing his planet, valuing his little rose. Even though those lessons were really valuable, I do think that retrospectively, there's a point that he regrets leaving his rose behind. And I think that the faster you learn that, the better, because you don't want to be 60 regretting a big decision. I think if you could fail fast, like do it, And I think that's how I feel. I feel like I've done a lot to try to discover, find my feet, where I should go, what I should do. And my thing is like, just try everything. Just keep trying, and something's gonna stick.
Yeah.
And
what's kind of what's unique about this book is, I mean, if you think about the narrative itself, it's not really applicable. It's not like a self book that you can read and, if it talks about money, then you can apply that, can apply that to your personal finances. Here we're talking about planets, we're talking about roses, we're talking about things
I love it.
We're talking about things that are probably symbolisms for parts of our life, and things that we can probably understand and relate to. but the narrative doesn't do much. It's when you are able to extract these lessons, and there's a quote that I've heard a couple years ago, and it says, "From a drop, make an ocean." Kind of like from this little bit of information, make a lot more. The lessons in The Little Prince, you have to kind of extract them. But once you do, they can provide a lot of value. They did in the book to The Little Prince and his appreciation for the rose that he was trying to get back to. But they can also do for us, right? Like whatever we have and hold dear, maybe not take it for granted. Realize where the value actually lies.
I think that's the fun part of like doing this, right? Because I think that's the irony, not the irony, I guess that's the wrong word, but like the beauty of like, this is a children's book, like this shows that, like that quote you just said, like you can take a lesson from anything really if you meditate hard enough, if you really think about it. I do think that the author purposely, did this. I think there's a lot of great lessons here. I don't think it was a fluke that he just wrote a book about this little prince and a pilot, and there's all of a sudden all these lessons in it. I do think there was like this meticulous meditation to write this book, but it is like funny that it's meant for kids. It's a kid's book. It's a French kid's book, and yet it's so profound if you really sit down and think about it. But if you just read it, I do think it's just a good book. Like for a kid, it's a good book about imagination, about meeting different characters and learning these different things. It's really valuable.
I mean, I like it because back in the day when I liked reading far less than I do now, I looked for picture books. If it didn't have pictures, it didn't make sense. I was not gonna read it.
For me, if it didn't come with a toy, bro, I used to get the Spy Kids books because they always came with a laser or something.
So the illustrations really add to the book, and I think you can get different versions of the illustrations, but all of them will probably stay close to what the author wanted.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know if you want to discuss something else, but I have a couple of quotes here that maybe we can talk about before we talk more about the symbolism of the different mans he encounters in the planet.
Yeah, I have a couple quotes too. Yeah, I got a couple. If you want, do we start linear, like the beginning, or do you just, does it matter, like wherever?
It doesn't matter. You can just whatever we're talking about at the moment.
I think we've already talked about it a little bit, but just to highlight it again, in the beginning of the book, he highlights that all grown-ups were once children, but only few of them remember it. I think we touched about it a little bit, but that was like impactful to me. I think that we tend to forget that we were once kids too, and nothing's wrong with that. I think nothing's wrong with being a kid, and I think we did kind of envelop that conversation a little bit, but I valued that, and right in the beginning, it sets the tone for the book. Like, how are you gonna consume this? Are you gonna consume it as a child or as an adult? And I feel like it puts you in a almost like a guilt like thing, like are you trying to be something you're not, type of thing. But I don't know, that's one quote I liked.
I mean, that's a great quote, and I like the fact that he mentions they don't remember, or what was the exact quote? They tend to forget.
Yeah, all grown-ups were once children, but only few of them remember it.
Only few of them remember it. And it's kind of the truth, right? Like, everyone probably has some baby pictures, especially now, right? If you were
now whatever
30 or younger, you probably have some baby pictures of yourself. So you can recognize that at some point you were a baby, you were a child. But what of your dreams or your plans of what you enjoyed? Does much of that still relate to yourself? Like, if you did what you used to do, or like if you talked about the things that you used to talk about, or what kind of took your time and your attention when you were young, that's kind of like what was in your heart in a way. Has that been forgotten over the years, where like maybe more serious things, as the Little Prince sometimes discusses, right? Like they were so preoccupied in the importance of what their tasks were, like maybe being part of a family, part of a work, career, all these other responsibilities, we can call it, maybe a child doesn't have. I think that's kind of like what makes you forget your childhood dreams or what you wanted. And I mean, I think it's a sad thing.
Yeah. I think that's the joy of being a kid, that you have the freedom to dream. I think that sometimes as adults you don't have the freedom to dream, or you feel like you don't, because you have these responsibilities. Like, like you have a family, you have kids. Like, I can't just quit my job and become a professional clown, even though I love being a clown. You might feel like you can't, right? Because you have all these responsibilities. Maybe as a kid you dreamed of this, but you had nothing preventing you to dream. And I think that's the reality, a lot of us, the cruel reality we face sometimes, that we feel like we can't dream because of our circumstance. But I think the overall theme of this book is trying to teach us that it's okay. Like, try to find ways to be a kid again, and almost like forgiving us for growing up. Like, it's okay. I get it. You've grown up, but it's okay. Like, you can go back a little bit. Like, try to find little things to be a kid again. I don't know. That's how I feel.
Yeah, I mean, and I mean that's another question, right? When you look in the world today, sadly, and this is a sad fact, but some people don't have, we could say, the luxury of
Yeah.
being a kid for long, right? As soon as they gain this level of consciousness, probably like when they were toddlers or very young, the world has demanded, their reality has demanded that they grow up very quickly.
Yeah.
So when you never actually experienced being a child, is it too late for you? Or when you're an adult, can you go back to a reality that you actually never were? You never were a kid.
I mean, that's a hard question. I think that's deeper than I know how to explain. But I think but that's a sad reality, man. That breaks my heart a little bit. It does, because you're right. There's kids who, at age 7, they have to start working and helping the family somehow, depending on what country you're born in, or your circumstance. And it was not their fault. They're just born in that circumstance. So that is the sad thing, and I do think that's the caveat, that some people's realities, the things we're talking about, might not fit everybody, because everyone's circumstance is so different. So we can only speak about our circumstance. I do think that in our circumstance, we can dream a little bit more. But I do think that if you're in that type of situation, yeah, I think that I hope they get moments of being a child. Hopefully, I mean, that's my hope.
I mean,
if that actually
perhaps
happens, I don't know.
we're being a little too, kind of negative about this situation, because I also know adults, they go maybe the opposite, right? Like, where, let's say, they buy some toys or stuff. Like, I've seen this a lot with Legos. They buy all these sets, and you ask them the reason, they might say, "Oh, when I was growing up, I couldn't have them." So now they're making up for that, and maybe they're able to maintain even more of the inner child than someone that did have the opportunity to kind of slowly and gradually grow up and become an adult. So maybe we're being too negative. Maybe those people that sadly have a rough childhood are a little ahead of us in terms of, keeping that inner child alive.
That's true, because it's like this frustration of something you never got to enjoy. So you're like self-aware of something you missed. So maybe you make more of an effort to go back. And if someone had like I guess, normal childhood that grows up a little bit faster in a normal pace, I guess, might not have the desire, or forget to have the desire to be a child again. So I get what you're coming from. Yeah, I respect those people that love Legos. I was a Play-Doh kid myself. I was a Play-Doh kid. Carlos, you give me Lego vibes. Are you a Lego kid?
My brother is, but actually, I don't play much with Legos. Probably because I have 2 dogs, and they would probably end up with them eating them or doing something.
No, but
strange.
as a kid, I'm not saying now. I mean, I wish I had Play-Doh.
Growing
you
up,
a Lego?
I enjoyed puzzles, and Legos kind of fit that description. So maybe I did play with Legos, but they were a lot more expensive. So I think puzzles were more of my thing.
Do you mean like jigsaw puzzles, or what type of puzzles?
Jigsaw
Okay,
puzzles.
okay.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. I was just a destructive kid. I just wanted to squish things. So yeah, bring another quote. What other quote you got?
Okay.
I have a bunch. I mean, you're right. We can talk about this all day if you wanted to, because I have literally like 20 quotes.
Yeah. I'll just kind of rush through this one because I think it kind of fits to what we're doing in this podcast. And this idea, or this quote said, "Words dropped by chance that, little by little, everything was revealed to me." And this is a quote said or spoken by the pilot, kind of describing his first interaction with the Little Prince and how he came to understand him. Because the Little Prince doesn't really make a formal introduction. It doesn't say, this is my name, this is where I'm coming from, this is what I want, this is what you want.
Mhm.
It's just that little by little, it became apparent that he was out of this planet. He did not come from Earth. He did understand some of those things. And then little by little, the pilot came to understand, or like it was revealed to him. And I think, to me, that speaks very positively of the pilot in this case, because he was very patient. You know, he waited for the other party to little by little kind of reveal everything. And I think that's kind of the approach we're taking in this podcast, right? We're by no means experts in any book, any topic. We did not go to, 8 years of literature, college, or whatever you call it. We're just, we're readers. We like to enjoy a good book, and we hope that whoever's listening does the same. And little by little, maybe it's revealed to us, and maybe we become better at it. Maybe we learn more about these authors and kind of the stories they bring to life.
Yeah, and I think I think any author would want this, right? Because I think it shows you're consuming something more like deeper than just surface level reading, and I think that's what they would want. They'd want this. So I think it's a homage. I don't know how you pronounce it to the readers.
The readers and authors,
sorry.
correct. Yeah, I mean,
yeah.
one of the main, I guess we could say, positive influences I had when it comes to reading, as far as academic reading goes, it was in high school. A teacher mentioned, like he instructed or told his students, I don't really care about the narrative. Like, you can get the narrative from Spark Notes. Like, the narrative is just what happened in the book. I care about what you think happened. Like, once you read it, he mentioned, you own it. Now, this is what you make of it. And kind of like, and of course there's limitations to that, If you said the sky was blue, you cannot make it red, but you can probably describe why you made the sky blue. What the symbolism behind that is. And I think that kind of gave me the freedom of, I'm not wrong. It's not like math where like 4 plus 4 is 8 and you cannot really change that. Although some people may argue that too nowadays. But with reading is, you read it, you own it, your experience in life and the way you see the world is immediately mixed into that version of reality you see and kind of what you think. And maybe that's why readers, I probably shouldn't say that I'm a reader because I'm not close to being that yet. Readers don't enjoy movies, right? Because movies kind of rob them of that ability to kind of imagine that world and see it the way they want to see it, because now you're seeing someone else's vision for that.
Yeah. I do think there's like the same thing, a balance to it. I think that, like, I think readers will always hate on the movie version, but they're still happy that someone made. I mean, to at least, for example, I can only speak about my sister. My sister loves to read books. Loves, like, she for me is a reader, man. She has cabinets of books. That's where she spends her checks. Literally, she's an avid reader. And that's my goal. My goal is to keep, or our goal is to keep reading. But she always tells me, like, she usually hates on any movie that the book was made. But there's like this satisfaction, like someone cared enough of this book, like I did, and tried to make a movie out of it. I think that in itself, there's like some satisfaction, that acknowledgement that this was a good book, a good story, so good that I wish I'm gonna invest some money to try to create a movie out of it. But I do think majority of people that read books and they hate on the movie because you can only give so much information in 2 hours compared to a whole book.
Exactly. Yeah.
I have another quote for you, and I have a question for you too.
Let's go.
Okay. And this is, I think the fox said this, if I remember correctly. And now here's my secret, a very simple secret. It is only with the heart that one can see rightly. What is essential is invisible to the eye. And my question is, what do you think the author meant by seeing rightly with the heart?
Yeah, I think if I were to summarize the lessons or kind of the main takeaway for this book, it really circles back to the Little Prince and the Fox, the interaction they had. Like in all his exploring, he came to different people that maybe told him, what he didn't want to become, what he doesn't want to be. And he kind of, in a way, felt sorry for most of them. But the fox is interesting because he maybe didn't think much of him. Maybe in most movies or in most books, the fox is not really the main character or the good character. Maybe it's even a bad character.
Yeah.
But he gifted him the best lesson.
Yeah.
And,
I agree.
that quote kind of is the main lesson of the book to me. Only with the heart you can see rightly. And it's kind of maybe the weakness we as humans possess, that where we usually try to perceive reality by what we can see. And sometimes the biggest things, or the most important things especially, are invisible. Like you can't really make a good representation of a person by what you see. Like it's understanding them, and kind of the fox gives him more than one lesson. Like
Here's a
in that
bunch of lessons.
interaction,
Yeah.
he gives him lessons on friendships and on what's valuable in a friendship. And he talks about certain rights where, like, if you want to be my friend, don't really come close to me. He says another thing that I really loved. He says, words are the source of misunderstanding. Basically, don't talk too much. Just kind of stay nearby. Let's kind of interact, and then eventually that friendship will kind of arise naturally. Whereas when you try to force it, maybe, you end up with bad friendships or not the best ones. But I think, we could really talk about that quote forever, because it's just in almost anything that, seeing really, or attempting to see with the heart, that we can get a good representation of what someone is. And that's kind of our weakness, right? Like most people see with the eyes, and me included. There's a story I recall where a king was to be chosen, and I think this story is in the Bible. It's in first of Samuel. And when the king is being chosen, the children of certain men are presented, and the one choosing the king believes that maybe the tall one or maybe the strong one will be. And it's not that. He's seeing with his eyes, but he should not see that way. The heart is what mattered, and the king was chosen based on what was inside the heart. But we as humans can't really do that, and we attempt to, we want to, but sometimes it's kind of invisible. It's invisible to the eye.
And I think the solution to that, though, this is my solution to that, is also the fox teaches him, is that what makes it valuable is time, right? Taming. He talks about the word tame, like you haven't tamed me, I haven't tamed you. And the word tame alludes to this investment of time. So I think the way we can see more than the face value of something is investing time. Because only then will we be able to see deeper than what we're seeing at face value. And like on that note, like I loved some like I don't know, they were just very like romanticized, like how you describe this. He said, let me read it here. But if you tame me, my life will be filled with sunshine. I'll know the sound of footsteps that will be different from all the rest. Other footsteps send me back underground. Yours will call me out of my burrow like music. And then look, you see the wheat fields over there? I don't eat bread. For me, wheat is of no use whatever. Whatever. Wheat fields say nothing to me, which is sad. But you have hair the color of gold. So it will be wonderful once you've tamed me. The wheat which is golden will remind me of you. I just found that that's so beautiful, the way he was saying that things that right now mean nothing to me, because of our relationship, now things will have more value and bring more happiness to me. How do you relate that in your day-to-day life? I mean, especially, in our cases that we're married, I think we can relate to his experience here with the fox.
Yeah, I think at this point in the story, the little prince is maybe upset, maybe sad. If you remember, he came to this journey to find a way to maybe solve his problem with a rose that he learned to love, even though she was very vain. As we can discuss the rose a little more. But he believed that she was unique. That she was the only rose in the entire universe, and that in his eyes, that's what made her valuable. Which we as humans, kids, everyone kind of values uniqueness, right? Like we think about the most expensive cars in the world. we might mention, oh, there's only 4 of them in the world, and that's
exactly.
impressive, and we love that idea for some reason, that it's hard to
Yeah.
obtain. But on Earth, the little prince comes to discover that there's not just one rose. There's multiple. There's, I think, rose bushes.
Yep.
And his impression upon meeting the rose bushes is that he starts crying
Mhm.
because now his rose is less valuable in his own eyes.
Yeah.
He starts to think, oh, what I have is not special. There's multiple roses. But the fox reminds him, and it kind of maybe reminds every husband or every person that values someone or something, that the value doesn't really come from something being the unique or the only thing in the world. Or maybe even that, the value doesn't come from that, but its uniqueness and its value comes from the relationship and maybe even the time and, all those good things that happen once you interact with someone, fall in love for a long period of time. And that's what makes something special, right? All those roses, according as he comes to realize, were strangers. They were very different from his special rose, the one that he knew and he had, as the fox said, tamed, the one that had tamed him or he had tamed it.
Yeah. No, and I agree. I think that that's what brings the value. And I just love even meditating myself when I was reading this, like feeling like that fox, like describe those things. Like I started thinking like my relationship with my wife, and I was like, okay, what things, before didn't really, I valued, but it didn't really mean much, And like, for example, like my wife, when we started dating, she loves pizza, right? Loves it. It was hilarious to me how much she loved pizza. Like date night, just pizza was enough, and she'd be so happy. But for me, like I made pizza all my life, and it's good. Don't get me wrong. I'm not trying to hate on pizza. It's just pizza, though. It's just bread, some sauce, and some pepperoni. Like I'm not trying to hate on it, but like it's not that big deal. But once I started dating and adding this value, now when I see a Domino's or anything, I think of my wife because of how much she loves pizza. And like that's something that before, that feeling of just driving around, and seeing these things, these interactions, it meant nothing to me. But now because there's this value system, I care about somebody who cares about this thing, it makes me care about it. But it also brings me joy, like thinking about it. So it made me really resonate with the fox of like, and meditating a little bit. Like, what are things that I value more now that I have someone, that, and it can be like little things, and you're like, man, that's true. Like before, I didn't care about that, and now, like, a certain smell, a certain chocolate bar, all of a sudden has more value because you care about something. I think that that's something beautiful that he's trying to teach here to the little prince, and that's what made his rose valuable, even though she was vain. And we can even talk about that a little bit. What's your opinion about the rose?
Beautiful rose that made the little prince take such a wild trip. I think, the vanity that the rose seemed to possess, because obviously she was beautiful. At least in the eyes of the little prince, she was the most beautiful thing he has ever seen. But he said something interesting. When he starts kind of maybe complimenting her, he starts to realize that those compliments don't really mean much to her because she already has such a high value for herself.
Yeah.
Like the rose already thinks like it was born the same day that the sun was born, and it's like has this cosmic beginning and elegance. It's just unique. But if you say, like, if you read what the little prince mentions, like, even though he admired her beauty, he says she began very quickly to torment him with her vanity. And that's kind of when you talk about like this battle of being a grown-up or a child, like it's a spectrum, right? Whether you want to remain a child or grow up. It's the same thing with beauty, right? Like this beauty that the rose held or had was great. Like the prince loved her. He thought she was beautiful. But her vanity in a way made her kind of like less to me.
Yeah.
Like in a point where like he didn't know how to deal with it. He had to fly away. He had to like go look for an answer somewhere else. He just couldn't deal with her beauty or her vanity more than anything.
I think the struggle also was that he felt like he was investing so much to her, but she didn't appreciate it. But there is this like touching moment, I guess, when he's about to leave her, that she acknowledges, or the rose, I'm not sure if it's a she, right? The rose acknowledges that she loves the little prince, and he was shocked. He was like you mistreat me. Like, what do you mean? You know, he was so confused.
And I mean, roses, as kind of in the beginning of the book mentions too, have thorns, right? And they are to protect themselves. As Rose mentions to the little prince in a wild exaggeration, she can even defend herself from lions with these thorns.
Yep.
And to me, kind of vanity is another version of that thorn, right? Where you're so vain and you kind of, in a way, maybe repulse people.
Dang.
It's kind of a way to protect yourself from, being hurt. People that approach you and end up hurting you, or like tigers, you develop these thorns without even maybe realizing that that's what they are. And I think the little prince learns a lot about what Rose actually meant, or what she actually was like, from one of the first planet he visits. If you remember this journey that he went on, one of the first planets he visits is inhabited by a vain man. A man that just wants to be admired. And this makes no sense to the little prince, because he wants him to clap for him, he wants him to say how amazing he is, but the little prince tells him, you're the only one here. No one else is admiring you. You're all alone. But still he wanted that. And I think that's kind of the way he does it is kind of a masterful way of highlighting when someone's primary, moving force is a certain quality. In terms of someone that's vain, or that has that quality of being vain, they isolate themselves. They live in this little planet, and they do want to be admired. And if you don't admire them, then you get out the planet. Like, you don't belong there. But in a way, does that make them actually important, or does that make them lonely? Like, they end up alone. Like,
bro, you blew my mind. You blew my mind. I honestly didn't think of it at all that way. Like, that just blew my mind. Because, man, wow, that's right. I agree. Like it's almost it's a protection, but that lack of vulnerability and maybe admitting things that aren't perfect, that lack of vulnerability now makes them lonely, and it pushes everybody away. And the only people that are accepted are people that applaud them, even though they might not deserve it, like they might not even deserve the applause. But because they're so lonely, that's the only thing that's valuable to them, I guess, is that validation from others. Bro, it blew my mind.
It seems like this topic really resonated with you. Do you consider yourself a vain man?
maybe that's what's happening here. Maybe I'm super vain. I think that the lesson he was trying to point towards is that also that doesn't lead to true happiness. Even if you had all the applause, it's not true happiness, because maybe the people that applaud you don't even like you. They just they want something else from you. They don't like you for you. If that makes any sense. I think that if someone knows what is the key for your friendship, if someone knows that, like, I'm talking about like a bad person, right? I'm not saying like in general, but if there's a bad person that knows the key to your friendship, and let's say you're a rich man, if she knows all I gotta do is, applaud them, tell them what they want to hear, eventually they'll give me their earnings or a car or something, then you're getting false friends, because the only thing that's valuable to you is one thing that someone can just give you, even though it's not real. And I think that's the fear of trying to find friends. And I think that's the whole theme as well with the little prince, is when he first meets the fox, he tells him that he's just trying to find friends. Like, that's one of the reasons he's been searching. He's trying to understand his rose and then find friends, because he almost didn't want to stop and talk to the fox, because he was like, oh, I can't waste my time with you. I'm trying to find friends. And I think that adds to this theme of like, if you're trying to find a true friend and that's the only thing that matters to you, then you're not going to find it. You're not going to find true friends.
Yeah. I mean, in the case of the vain man, he quickly draws the little prince away. Like, he has nothing in common with him. He ends up going to another planet. Well, actually, we skipped a planet. I don't know if you want to go back to the time he met the king.
Yeah.
The king that gives orders and seals requests.
He was a funny guy, though.
What was your take on him?
Well, I thought it was He had some bars though. My boy had some bars. He said, let me see if I can find the exact quote because I didn't write it down on my notes, but I remember when I was going over my notes or the book more. So let me see here. He says, actually, I might have it right here. He just talks about how I mean, I'm roughly gonna say it because he just um he kept insisting on giving reasonable orders to maintain the illusion of power, you know, and but he did drop some knowledge for a leader because he said something like I can't ask someone to do something that I don't believe they can do. Like
I
it'd
think the
be
quote. I think the quote you're looking for, I'll just read it for you because I really like
yeah.
it too, and I highlighted it. Is one must require from each one the duty which each one can perform.
There you go. That's it. Yeah, that was a bar. My boy was dropping some knowledge right there.
Another
Yeah.
one that I liked in that same interaction, but more, maybe I can mention that after you finish your comment.
No. I was just gonna highlight how like that illusion of power was just kind of funny to me. Was that he tried to maintain the illusion by having by making things up. He would say like, "Oh, I'm the master of this whole area, this whole universe," or whatever he was saying. Like he was bigger, he was the king of everything. And then the little prince is like, "But there's no one there." He's like, but he just tried to maintain this illusion of it. And it's just funny to me. I think that maybe as humans we can fall into that too. You know, like what's our illusion of power? You know, like
So, what do you think the king can represent in our case? Because obviously, most of us and most of the listeners will not be kings one day and cannot, you know, imitate or go against what this king stood for. But in what areas of our life can we avoid some of the silliness? Because when you think about some of the comments the king made when he ordered the little prince to yawn or not to yawn,
yeah.
and the little prince said, "I can't do that. Like I can't control a yawn. I have to yawn." And then the king goes back and says, "Well, I order you not to yawn now, then, or to yawn." And then he says, "Well, I can't control that either. Like it just happens." Then the king addresses the issue and says, "Well, I order you to yawn sometimes and to not yawn some other times." And the little prince is like, "I guess I'll do that." They're like, and to me, kind of like that speaks to me on a personal level is our kind of desire to control things that we cannot control. This king wanted to feel like his authority was respected and he controlled every single being in his planet, all the men. And we might not expect that from our friends or our family, but we might expect that from ourselves maybe, right? Where we want to have this predictability of the outcome or what happens in our life. But doing that seems silly to the little prince because it's impossible. Like you can't really do that.
Yeah.
And we can't really do that ourselves either. Like no matter if we have power or authority, we can't do it. We have to be, as he said, reasonable in our expectations and our maybe demands or what we think of people, what we ask of them.
Yeah, I think that's like what you're speaking of talks about maybe your internal anxiety. I think that's the like trying to over plan maybe, like, oh, if I do this and I'll do that and then like in 3 years and then this, but you can't control the future, you can only do so much. And if you try to over again, like you're saying, like try to have like a sense of control, it's almost like a waste of time to a certain extent. Up to a point, right? Proper planning is always good, but that overdoing it of trying to have this power, or the futility of having this absolute control instead of just acknowledging your place, I guess. So that's how I saw the king.
This takes me to another thing that I wanted to highlight. And if anyone does like a quick little search on maybe YouTube or on Google for the Little Prince and the narrative or the symbolism, it's going to tell you, I think I got this from Google directly. It said, well, not Google directly, but it's maybe SparkNotes. It said loneliness, friendship, love, and loss. Those are the main themes of the book. The Little Prince makes observations about life, adults, and human nature. And one of those biggest observations to me, besides the one that we already discussed about the heart, and what's invisible to the eye, happens actually in this point of the book where he's with the king. And he says, "It is much more difficult to judge oneself than to judge others." The Little Prince makes this kind of statement after visiting the king's planet. And that's a universal truth. We can see that here everywhere. Why do you think that is? Why do you think it's much more difficult to judge oneself than to judge others?
Because to judge oneself is to accept maybe things that you don't like about yourself, so I think we all hope to be good people, have good qualities. To judge yourself is to accept faults, and I think that's like a difficult reality, to do. And it's easier to judge others because it makes you yourself feel better, like for your faults. You're like, well, they do this wrong and that wrong, so it makes me feel better, instead of like not focusing on anyone else and just like focus on you. What do you got to work on, and then doing it. I think that sense of accountability is hard when no one else is expecting you to be better. If it's just you, what's your motivation?
And I think if I could add something to this quote, I think it's more difficult to judge oneself correctly.
There you go.
Than others, right? Because when we judge us, we can kind of go to an extreme where we kind of criticize so much because we know everything, right? We seem to believe that we know everything about ourselves. And whereas with others, we just see like a little glimpse of reality. Maybe the day you see them during the day, or what the actions, the words, or what they did. But with ourselves, we see everything that led to it. We can see kind of our intentions, our hopes. If we fall short, we might even be able to tell, we fell short, but like we really wanted this. Like we missed the bar, but our intention was higher. Whereas with others, we just see what they achieved. We see either the actions or the words. There's no background. There's no story. If someone, is having a rough day and they do something rude on the road when we're driving, we don't really get to see the day. We don't get to see what led to that decision or that point in time. With ourselves, we can, right? So when we lash out, when we do something we shouldn't, we get to explain it to ourselves and say, well, look at the day you had. That's why you weren't the version. And I think that goes back to maybe even a contrast or like a counter argument to this idea that it's only with the heart that you can see rightly. What is essential is invisible to the eye. Because we judge others based on what we see. What we see with the eyes. And with us, it would take more like self-reflection, knowing ourselves, kind of being able to determine our heart or what's in our heart and making that judgment and making it correctly, right? Because if you're feeling sad and you're making this overly critical judgment of yourself, like that wouldn't be the goal either. Like you want to be balanced.
Yeah. And that, like that, I think having accountability is like something that I think as people, we don't like what is to be expected. Like if you don't have your own set of standards or goals or anything, if you're just going where the wind blows you, like what is there to judge? Like you have no set standard to judge. So I think that's like the internal struggle I think people face is like how you're saying, like either they're too judgmental where they can't applaud even the good things that you do. You're just like, oh, you're the worst human being ever. Like you go to that extreme, or like I'm the best and like everyone else is wrong. Like just having a balanced view of yourself is difficult, because I think normally you judge yourself really harsh, but or the opposite, you just give yourself too much room to make mistakes, instead of like, no, I should have been better and I could do this differently. But if we never sit down and meditate on what we can improve on, then how will you improve on it? You'll just keep being reactionary instead of a thought-provoked action, if that makes any sense. Hopefully that makes sense. I wanted to talk about, I mean, it's kind of like a sad, it's a short planet, but I did think it's something that people fall on, unfortunately. And it was the drunkard planet. It was super short. It was literally like, I don't know, 8 lines, 7 lines of a interaction with the drunkard. And it was basically a drunk man, and the little prince basically tells him, like, why are you drinking?
Yeah.
And then he basically tells him he's drinking because he hates that he's drinking. Like,
Yeah.
something like that, like this cycle he's in. And again, just a little side note, alcoholism is such a serious issue. I'm not trying to talk about that right now. I'm just talking about how we maybe find ways to excuse bad behavior by doing bad behavior. Or not bad, I guess that's the wrong word. Maybe things you want to improve on, but you keep doing the cycle. Like, and I'm trying to think of a situation. Like, let's say I want to be better with my time, but the time you do have, you use social media. And again, I'm putting myself in these shoes, right? I'm trying to judge myself here. You're saying I want to be better with my time, but then you fill that extra time with using my phone. And then you feel bad afterwards because you're like, dang it, I wasted all that time. But then the next day you have a new opportunity, and then you just do the same cycle over and over again. Yeah. And I think that's kind of like the lesson that was being taught here, that cycle of shame produced those feelings. Those feelings of shame made him want to escape his reality. So to escape his reality, he drank again.
Yeah.
So, and that's like almost, you can apply it to anything. Like if you want to work out, you're like, oh, I need to be better, gotta go to the gym. But you look at yourself in the mirror and then you hate what you're seeing. That shame might push you to eat more, you know? And then you're just like this cycle of trying to escape that reality. It's just super sad. I just felt like it was such a short stint, but I thought it was so true to like what kind of happens, especially nowadays.
Yeah, I mean, he really did speak a lot with few words on this vicious cycles that you're talking about, right? Because being drunk could be an example. I mean, sadly, there's a lot of those, and drug addiction could be another. And you know, when you kind of break up the words that the little prince exchanged with the drunkard, you know, the few words that the drunkard spoke was, you know, I drink, and then he asked, why do you drink? And he said, I drink to forget. And what are you trying to forget? That I drink. So it was kind of silly to the little prince that he was doing these things in a cycle. And maybe, you know, it kind of speaks volumes to humans because we do that as well. And I think you gave some examples, right? Like working out and all these other things. You know, I think being lazy is one, right? Like we feel like we're not successful. Like we wanted to achieve all these things. And we're depressed that we didn't get the degree we wanted or, you know, get the job we wanted. And instead of working more on it, we're just depressed. We're kind of stuck in that cycle. And what you're just reinforcing is that idea, like, that you're probably never going to get it. But why are humans, as the little prince probably like alluded to, kind of stuck in the past? Because, I mean, it was, from our point of view, the drunkard could have fixed that, right? Like, he stops drinking today, then tomorrow he changes, he doesn't feel that guilt, and he can do something else instead of drinking because he feels ashamed or guilty. Why? I mean, if he can't do it, it's because we humans can't do it. Why do we seem to find comfort in bad things? Like, what do you think that speaks or that says about human nature?
I think that, I mean, it's just because it's whatever's frictionless that you'll do more of, right? Like what takes the most energy to do. And we, again, now more than ever, we have the availability to do the frictionless option. Like it's so easy to do nothing, you know? It's so easy. So it's just like the saying of like, you know, what's the saying? Like so el camino, como? It's like like you have two paths, and most of the people take the easiest path because it's the less difficult one. So I think as humans, we just lack self-control and discipline, like naturally. I think naturally we just, I guess that word's kind of complicated to even say like what's natural, but I just think that the tendency is to create good habits. You have to break bad habits. But again, to do that, just like the drunkard, you have to acknowledge the problem and then do something different, which is change the habit. And I think that's the issue we as humans face, is that we're fighting habits we've built for years. You know, there's habits that, you know, if you've never exercised ever, how do you expect to all of a sudden go 5 times a week? You know, like you might do it for 2 weeks, but you'll burn out because you'll never done it before. So I think it's fighting or breaking those bad habits and then acknowledging that they exist.
Yeah.
That's how I feel, I think. What about I wanna know what you how you related to the businessman.
The businessman.
Yeah, he was I think he was just like a personification of materialism a little bit. That's kind of how I took it. But how did you view the businessman?
You know, to me, when I first read this book, and I'm trying to translate back to that point in high school, I read this book pretty late. Unlike you, that you know you were.
I don't remember it.
They read it to you when you were younger. To me, like the difference between the king and the businessman was not as clear as the Little Prince or as the businessman made it, right? Like kings reign over and businessmen own.
Oh yeah.
And they were so busy owning, like he was just counting millions of little objects. In this case, we come to find out that they're stars. And this businessman believes that he owns the stars. They belong to me. And he says one of the quotes that I highlighted here. They belong to me because I was the first person to think of it. And this idea of like people feeling ownership over what they think of is kind of a newer idea, right? Like it goes back to the idea of owning land or not owning land, and that would get messy, so we're not going to discuss it. But you know, the businessman was so caught up on this that he was missing life, and I think you're right. It probably does exemplify or symbolize materialism, but to the Little Prince, it was silly. Like it just made no sense, right? Like he couldn't relate to them, so he continued the journey. Most kids would probably agree with that, right? Like if they had a glimpse of an idea of someone that has a business or works in the stock market, it would make no sense, right? But to an adult, it's not silly. To an adult, we understand that we could even admire. Like I think you got to go back to the beginning of the book as well, where he's saying how when someone describes a house, they don't talk about important things. They don't talk about, oh, it's beautiful, it has these colors and this and that. Most people don't understand. They don't visualize anything like that. But once you tell them, oh, it's $1 million home. Oh, that's a beautiful house.
Yeah.
They don't even need a picture. They just have this idea that because of the value, now it's important.
It must be pretty. Yeah, exactly.
It must be pretty. Well, this businessman, how the Little Prince sees him as silly. Like it's kind of maybe motivates me or reminds me to see other things as a form of value instead of money, instead of you know, a number.
Yeah.
Which, you know, at the end of the day is not important, right? Like this businessman was so caught up in something so stupid, like owning the stars. He didn't own the stars, but he thought he did.
Yeah.
Same thing like with humans. Like if you accumulate wealth and you have this enormous amount of money, does it really contribute to the day your day-to-day life more than maybe having a healthier life or taking care of your family and living more relaxed? Shouldn't that have more value to us? And you kind of meditate on that. You can kind of take those reflections back to your own personal experience and kind of make changes, or maybe just kind of see if you think you're being as silly as that businessman counting the stars.
Yeah, I think it was trying to point. For me, it pointed out like, what's my value system? It made me ponder that, because he did acknowledge, because he says at the end of this interaction, he says, he starts talking about what things he owns, right? And he doesn't own a lot. But the little prince says, in his little planet, we didn't really describe it, but he has his flower, which he waters every day. But he also owns 3 volcanoes, which I rake out every week. I didn't rake out the extinct one because you never know. But this is what he says. It says, so it's of some use to my volcanoes, and it's useful to my flower that I own them, but you're not useful to the stars. And I thought that was like, what's your value system? Nothing, like, things aren't bad. Like, you can own things. Like, nothing's wrong with that. I think it's like, why are you owning them, I guess, is a question. Like, do you bring value? Does it bring true value to yourself? And almost like, do you put value to the thing you're purchasing or having or getting? And I think that's like the question. Like, having a lot doesn't really define, or it's not a good metric for a good value system. But
yeah,
it was a cool interaction. When I first read it, though, the second time, I don't know why I was like I felt like I understood the lesson, but I almost, like, weirdly enough, understood the businessman. But then I'm like, but this time reading it, it just shows to me maybe like a little bit of growth, or maybe where my goals were at that time. Because now I do see it much differently than I did when I first read it.
Yeah.
So,
I mean, all of these, even though, like we said, the beauty of this book, even though it's a children's book, when you read it as an adult and when you experience life a little bit and then you reread it, you can kind of see yourself in those decisions. You know, am I being silly, like these, like the drunk man, the Bane man, or the businessman? Which takes us to the next guy. I think we discussed most of them except the lamplighter, which on a surface level might seem like maybe the stupidest one of them all, right? Like, he's the one that's just there in the planet, lighting the lamp at certain times and not lighting it, you know, making it dark at others. But surprisingly, he's the only one that the little prince sort of admired or felt this form of connection with. What do you think that is? Like, what do you think? And he mentioned the reason, but I think, you know, I wanted to hear your take on it first.
I think he respected him because the way he viewed this assignment, this order, he describes it as an order, or the lamplighter describes it as an order, is that he had this sense of duty and almost like devotion to this purpose. And maybe the little prince resonated with him because in his planet, he had a sense of purpose. He had to take care of the flower. He had his volcanoes to take care of every day. He enjoyed the sunset at the end of the day, every single day. Like, he had this habitual tasks that he had to do, like a sense of purpose. And I think the lamplighter showed that he was faithful to that purpose, even though he tried to provide a solution because he was exhausted of just doing the thing every single day.
You know,
what about you?
I think you mentioned one of the quotes that I wanted to discuss, where he says, "There is nothing to understand," said the lamplighter. "Orders are orders." What do you feel about something like that? Would you be able to do something without understanding it? You know, that's kind of the struggle between an adult and a child, because a child can do things without understanding them clearly. I mean, the world is new to them. A lot of things they don't understand. Maybe their parents ask something of them, like, "Stay by my side when we cross the street." Maybe they don't know the implications. Maybe they don't know how much safety that simple order provides to them.
Yeah.
They just listen it because they love their parents. They know that they want the best for them, and, you know, they have this connection with them. But as an adult, when you have that same quality, do you think that's an asset or a liability? Do you think that makes you more vulnerable, or you think you more valuable? Like, you can live a better life for having that same attitude?
So I think that it depends what you want to be. I think as a cog in a machine, man, you're valuable, so valuable. But as like a self progression in life, I don't think it's in long term. I don't think it's an asset. I think the way I was viewing this was the little prince made him ponder, did you search for other solutions? Almost like, oh, like you could, you can walk that way. You can never do, you don't have to do this because the sun was setting. Because when he initially had this order, he was saying, like, it was like, I don't know what the time scale was, like, oh, I had to turn on the light once a day or something. I forget what it was. But because the his planet started spinning faster, he had to do it more and more and more, to the point he was doing it every 2 minutes or something. So for me, the lesson I got from it was, at some point you have to stop and reflect, is what I'm doing still helping me reach whatever, like, the goal I set for myself? Because sometimes we just start doing it with this goal in mind, like, oh, if I take this job, if I shadow this person, I'll start, I want to progress this way, whatever. But if you don't stop and ponder, you'll just become a cog in a machine. You're not reaching a goal anymore. You're just doing the same thing over and over again. But if you were to self-reflect and meditate, okay, is this thing I'm doing still helping me achieve this other goal? And I think that's what I got from it in this circumstance personally.
Yeah. I wanted to take you kind of understand your take on this, because I know that, I know you personally, and you rank a little higher in the rebellion scale than I do. And orders are orders is probably like an insult to you. You want to
No.
understand.
No, and the thing is, dude, like, my life was that, though. Like, I grew up in a household that orders were orders. Like, que te valga, whatever. Like, whatever your sacrifice, you're gonna do what I'm saying. So I think there is a sense of irkness, whatever. I don't know what the right word would be, or like, oh, like a sensitive part of me when it comes to this, because all my life that's how I was raised, almost. Like this what makes you valuable, if you know how to take orders right.
Yeah.
But never acknowledging the person. It's always like you're just a thing doing this thing. So I do think that I'm more like, oh, I don't like that. What about you? Like, do you think it's an asset or a liability?
To be honest, now that you mentioned what you draw from it, I didn't focus on this when I read this little we call it a chapter, right? I focused on the Little Prince because that's actually the attitude that I admired. The Little Prince basically continued the journey when he met the king, when he met the geographer, when he met the Bane man or the drunkard. He didn't really have much of a connection. He didn't feel much for any of them. But for the lamplighter, he said, like, at least he's the only one that's living for something other than himself.
Yeah.
He's following an external order, and he's doing it very good. It might seem silly to us, but he's doing it pretty good.
Mm-hmm.
And that's always been something that I strive to do, right? Because when you look at what people value, you can think of someone that dedicates his life to art, to sports. It might not fit your personal value system, right? You might think, oh, that's not a balanced life. I wouldn't dedicate my entire life to being an Olympian or to being, a soccer player or a basketball player, whatever. But you can at least admire their dedication, right? And that's what the Little Prince did. Even though it was silly to him that this lamplighter was kind of maybe stuck, we could think, doing this over and over again, and he had no control over it, he felt like at least he's doing it for someone other than himself. And I think that's the best way to kind of see people in a balanced way, because no one's going to see things the exact way that you do. Like, no one's going to value their time at the same rate that you do, or put their time on the same task that you think are important. And if you only value people that think like you're going to end up not valuing many people, because everyone's different.
Yeah.
But if you learn to value people based on what they find important, like, for example, if someone grows up and thinks that dedicating their life to soccer and that's the most important thing, you can at least admire that, like someone's dedication, and say, well, this person is very dedicated to his craft, his art, his sport. And you can at least feel that connection with them instead of disconnect and be like, I have nothing in common with them. And I think that's something that we can take on to every person we meet, right? Like, whatever they care about, whatever they value, if they're doing it, or if they're putting as much effort as the lamplighter is to whatever they're doing, you can at least admire that.
Yeah, respect the dedication. And I think what tends to happen is maybe we judge someone is if they're living their life differently than your own life. To search for value for what you're doing, to acknowledge that, oh, what I'm doing is the right thing to do. Sometimes we could easily judge the lamplighter, right? Like, oh, what a waste of time. But the little prince took a moment to acknowledge, well, at least he's doing something for someone else.
Yeah.
So it almost makes you reflect, like, if we are extremely judgy people, right? If we tend to judge, maybe this could be a little task we can do. I'll try to find something good in them, or something that you respect or admire, right? Something you wish you had, because using sports figures, like, I don't have the dedication they got to anything. Like, it's impressive. You know what I'm saying? But you can easily judge, like you're saying, it's imbalance. How is your family? Who knows? That's, only they know. But my point being is, like, if we at least try to learn from, like, maybe one attribute, then we can at least be better, It is a fascinating one, the lamplighter.
Well, I think this is bringing us kind of towards the end of the book, and I only have two more things that I wanted to bring up. I don't know if you have any other quotes or themes that you would like to discuss.
I mean, I have quotes. I mean, I have one quote that I thought would be good to talk about. There was I forget who was talking to. Maybe it was the pilot talking to the little prince, but the quote, I just wrote it down, and says, "You see, one loves the sunset when one is so sad." That was the quote, and I think the question I was trying to ponder on was, why do you think the emotion of sadness can enhance an appreciation for something external, like a sunset or something else? And also, if there's anything you, like, relate to, like, maybe even though there was a tough moment in your life, for whatever reason, you appreciated something that maybe you usually don't appreciate.
I think that's probably a bigger question that I am ready to respond. But I think besides the book, and it might be missing something, I think that speaks of just human nature, right? Like, when we see something that's bigger than ourselves, like a sunset, every day we see those.
Especially in Arizona,
yeah,
beautiful.
Yeah. Or a huge mountain, maybe even waves in a beautiful beach. Whenever we see something like that, we start thinking of maybe things that are bigger than us. And maybe we remind ourselves of people, maybe that we've lost, or if for some reason, because I think it's weird as well, right? Like, why do sunsets make us sad? But I think sunsets make us sad if we're sad, right? If you're not sad, if you're having a great day, the sunset probably reminds you of a day you spent at the beach having fun, and maybe the sunset would be fun. So we tend to attach feelings to external things, kind of like the fox explained, right? The wheat means nothing to me, like, I don't need it. But once I become friends with you, since you have blonde hair color, it's gonna remind me of you, and it's gonna make me happy. So even though I have nothing to do with wheat, now that we're friends, it's gonna remind me of you. Well, the same thing can happen to a sunset or mountains or whatever external. Like, if it reminds us of a certain occasion or a certain experience we had, it might elicit those same feelings that we were feeling at that point. And I mean, a lot of things can do that. And that probably is more like a psychological or, maybe philosophical conversation, but, like, even smells can do that, right? Like, when you smell something that reminds you of back home, you might get sad, and you might think of, the menudo that your mom used to make or something like that. And it might just take you back home.
Do you think there's a way to, let's say there's a memory attached, maybe a negative memory, and let's use sunset because it's such everyone experiences sunsets, right? Like, I mean, it happens all around the world. What if there is, like, a negative memory with sunsets? Do you think that is set in stone, or could it be combated with a good memory?
Ooh, I think that's tough, and I think it honestly depends on everyone, because I think what I know about myself is once we don't like something, whether it's, a feeling or an experience, we want to stay away from it. And that makes sense, right? Like, if you, let's say you ate something that was bad for you, and you might not eat it for a long time.
Like Denny's.
Yeah, exactly. And it takes a lot of vulnerability to just be willing to try it again. The same thing, like, if for some reason sunsets are sad for you, you might avoid them. You might, and I think sunsets is metaphor for anything that you avoid or makes you sad. But if you're vulnerable enough to say, you know what, it's not fair to sunsets that it makes me sad to see them. I'm gonna try to attach some good memories to this. You might, with time, be able to say, you know what? Because I mean, you got to think of this. Your worst day is probably someone else's best day. Like the day you lost your job is probably the day someone found his dream job and they're super happy. So it's all like in your eyes. So if you work really hard, I think you could. But that's just my take on it.
I think I agree. I agree. Like the way I view it, it's almost like overwriting a file on a computer, and it's named the same thing, but you overwrite it. Maybe it's happened to you in a computer where you drag and drop a file that has the same name, and the computer asks you, "Do you want me to keep both, or do you want me to delete the old one?" And we gotta choose to delete the old one, And I think that the only way to do that, though, is like you said, having that vulnerability and that choice, that decision to experience whatever thing that was attached to like a negative, emotion or memory.
Yeah,
but
and stop being attached to the sad things, right? Because kind of like that drunk guy that kept drinking because he was ashamed of drinking. We can continue dwelling on some sad stuff just because that's what we're used to. That's what brings us comfort, and it's a weird coping mechanism. But I think all humans fall victim to that, where we kind of keep doing the things that we don't like doing, or that we don't really enjoy feeling. If we don't enjoy being alone or feeling lonely, we keep making decisions that lead to that. And it takes a lot of personal growth to be able to get to that point where you don't do that anymore. But I think it's possible. I think anyone can do it.
Yeah, I think so too. There's just so many beautiful lessons from this book.
But, unless we want to continue going on forever, I do have two closing thoughts that I wanted to kind of get your take on them. Okay. The first one is actually another quote towards the end of the book, so it kind of fits in this stage of our podcast or episode. What makes the desert beautiful is that somewhere it hides a well. And it's this idea of contrast, right? Like, a desert by nature has, less than a certain amount of rain every year. So water is kind of an opposite of a desert. But somewhere in the desert, there is probably a well. There is probably water. And if you're thirsty, that's what you're looking for. Like, what kind of thoughts come to your mind when you read that quote? Like, what did you think of? Because I don't think he's really discussing the desert. I think he's discussing something else.
I think, again, like, I feel like it pointed to me of, like, again, the value system. Like, what do you value for me? Showing that the value, like scarcity is what something that, increases the value of something. And even though the desert in general might feel overwhelming or death, there's nothing that provides any value, but that hope that there is a well somewhere out there might be enough motivation to keep going. So I think that for me, when I was reading that, I connected again with the experience of the rose, the Little Prince and the Rose. I just connected that experience of thinking of how vast, the choice of finding someone, in this case, his love for the rose, the scarcity of it, finding that one rose is what made it valuable. I think that's what I got from it. What about you? I feel like you got more of it than I did.
Well, I mean, I think to me it's full of symbolism, right? A desert is beautiful, but to him, to the Little Prince, the beauty lied on the fact that it hid a well. A desert cannot really hide anything, so it wasn't hiding a well; it just contained a well somewhere. And I think to me that tells me, a lot of people get stuck on what most likely will happen, or what is most apparent. And if you look at a desert, what's most apparent is that you're going to die of thirst. You're not going to find water. But the idea that somewhere in there's water kind of brings you hope. And you can travel that desert with hope that you'll find something. And, to me, that goes for people, right? Maybe it's hard to find a friend. It's hard to find someone that you connect with, or someone that, enjoys your company. And you might even get stuck in this feeling, oh, there's no friends. There's nothing out there. It's a desert. Yeah. But somewhere in that desert, there's one, right? Yeah. And if you take that approach towards anything that's unlikely, whatever it is, whatever you want, that idea that maybe somewhere in there it's kind of hidden, even though it's not hidden, but it seems like it's hidden because it's so hard to get. That should drive your optimism or your will to continue searching for it. And if you search the desert with that idea or that knowledge that somewhere in there you're going to find what you want, you're going to be much happier than if you have this attitude of defeat of like, it's a desert, I'm going to die, there's nothing here. And I think that's what I take from it.
Yeah, I mean, I think now, like hearing you, just personifying it in someone, I think that I agree with that thought of that. If thinking that there is something good in everyone can give you enough hope to try to find it, whether
Correct.
or not it exists, because the odds are in a desert, could you, will you find it? I don't know. The odds are against you. But if you have that positivity in your head that there is something good in that person, maybe it will, like you said, give you the will, the power to actually go and find it.
Yeah. And I was thinking in broader terms, but now that you mentioned that, it makes me think, even in everyone, like if you think about just any person that you kind of know, maybe you don't like them that much, maybe their qualities don't really match yours. But if you start taking this approach of maybe somewhere in their personality, there's a well, there's something I would connect to, there's something I would relate to and I would enjoy being and learning more about, then that's going to make you like that person a whole lot more, right? Because if you focus on the desert part and the ugly part, you're not going to like it. But if you focus on the part that maybe somewhere in there, this person, this random Joe that you at first glance don't like very much, might play the guitar and you love playing the guitar, and I want to get to know that Joe that plays the guitar, you're going to see them as beautiful. You're going to see, that there's something I can connect to. And I mean, that's a much better way to live than just seeing the worst in everyone and just thinking, I don't like that person because I don't like it.
I'm gonna play devil's advocate though. I'm gonna play devil's advocate. The insinuation that everyone has a well also implies that you're trying to get something out of them, right? Because the well provides water. You're thirsty. You drink the water. Now, does that corrupt the friendship if you're searching for something that benefits you? Or do you think I'm going way off of the point? How do you feel?
I mean, you could take that approach, especially if you're being the devil's advocate. That is kind of your job to take the opposite approach. But I don't agree. I think in nature and also in human relationships, there can be some form of, it could be, to every listener out there, we make up words, mispronounce words,
exactly,
invent words. We get pretty creative with it.
And, we say it with confidence though,
and that's what's important. This idea of mutualism, where a species can get something from another, but not really affect them or negatively affect them, or but even positively affect them. And I think there's a couple mutualistic or mutualism whatever relationships in nature, like where a certain bird eats certain fleas from a cow or from a crocodile, and that's how he gains a benefit. But also the crocodile or the cow gets rid of those fleas because it didn't need them. So that idea of the well, at first glance to you, it might seem like, oh, you're getting something out of them, but it's not necessarily bad if they also get something out of you, right? If
it's not,
I mean, it's a lonely world out there, and if you are maybe using, you might think, someone as a friend or to gain company, at the same time, simultaneously, they're doing the same with you, and that's not bad. That's not necessarily bad.
Nothing's wrong with that. And with that illustration you just gave, I felt like the solution to it is also assuming that water, that well doesn't have enough to feed someone else. By me saying that they're taking from that well is assuming they don't have enough to give. But if the well, again, I'm personifying it like it's a thing they can give, but in this case, the well might be overflowing, right? And then it needs someone to take, So,
or even if it's missing,
that's a positive tone.
You're assuming that you're looking for the well to drink from it, and I mean, I guess that's the correct assumption. But you could also be looking for the well to add to it. Maybe you have extra water and you want to add more to that well. So
dang, yeah, man, look at us being all cute. I love
okay,
it. And you have one more, right?
I have one last thought until maybe you have your last thoughts. The
Yeah.
last one is towards the end, and it's kind of a sad ending if you think about it that
Mhm.
way. And I don't want to discuss what actually happened in the book because I'm not even sure I understand it. Yet, some people say that he died. The
Yeah.
little prince died at the end. Some people say that he didn't. I don't know.
Yeah.
But towards the end, he tells the pilot, which at this point has become maybe not, accustomed, but maybe he's felt this form of connection or, love towards the little prince, that now when he looks at the stars, somewhere there, I will be laughing. I'll be living, right?
Mm.
And he tells him something unique will happen because every time that he looks at the stars in the future when he's on Earth, he might laugh. And people might think he's crazy. But he's laughing because somewhere out there is the little prince. Even though the little prince probably won't see it happening. How do you think that relates to us and the people we encounter? Because, the sad truth is that not everyone we know or we encounter in life, even if they're still alive somewhere out there, far away, maybe. In your case, you're in Mexico, far away from where I am. But I know that you're out there, so maybe, when I see a Mexican, something that reminds me of Mexico, I immediately can make that connection to you.
Mhm.
And maybe I even start laughing and someone will think I'm crazy, but they don't know about that. How do
Yeah.
you piece this in your head?
I think again, I might feel like I'm restating the point, but I think that's the beauty of relationships and friendships. Because again, throughout the whole story, he's trying to have a friend, and with this interaction of talking about stars, how both of them in their own way will be enjoying the moment, thinking of their friend, you know. And I think that's the beauty of relationships, that no matter the distance, you can keep being friends and thinking about each other because of those experiences, because of that time, that those inside jokes, whatever, it can be anything. It increases your experience, your enjoyment, because you enjoy it with someone else, And I think that's when it's resonating, that people might think someone's crazy, but that person that's crazy is happy. And I guess the question is, who do you want to be? Are you trying to be the crazy person that's laughing, happy? Or the person that's judging that person because they're crazy, they're laughing by themselves?
Yeah.
And I think for me, I'd rather be the crazy person laughing,
Yep. This book was written, I think, in 1940 or 1950. Yeah,
1943,
1943. Way before we lived. Today we live in a very connected world. So if you miss someone, even if they're far away in the world, you can still connect to them online through FaceTime, but in a way that kind of robs you of that. What the little prince is describing, this, we're not together, but yet we are. Like, yeah, I still care about you, even though our lives kind of took different turns. I still want my friend out there to be happy, or, to find whatever he's looking for. And to me, that idea of not knowing what's going on in someone's life, but still assuming the best, right? He told him that the pilot would look at the stars and see him living, but also see him laughing. In a way, it's happy.
Yeah, happy. Yeah.
And
It's beautiful.
that's the way you want to look at people, that that they're happy.
Yeah, I do think that how you're saying, like, nowadays, I think we're robbed a little bit of that feeling because we're so interconnected. But what's even sadder is that even that interconnection, there's this distance, like, because when you present yourself maybe on social media isn't the true you, and maybe those memories attached to that person are being corrupted by what you're observing on social media,
Yeah.
that distance, like, creates weirdly enough more value to your interactions. But if you're seeing them all the time, it might push you to not even miss them, because you're seeing them consistently on your social media. So Man,
I mean, I know where you fall on the whole, because they say distance makes the heart grow fonder.
fonder,
But
fonder.
also,
Yeah.
some people say out of sight, out of mind. But I mean, it seems like you're leaning on one side more than the other.
No, I do think that it depends who, right? You can't think of everybody, right? But I do think that those roses, so to speak, the people that you've tamed or tamed each other, those foxes, I guess,
Yeah.
I'll use that better, that term. Um, because you've spent so much time together, like our friendship, we've spent so much time together, so many experiences, story, we've traveled together, we've done so much things together. I think it's easier to think of those types of friends compared to, like, someone you hung out in high school with, and you hope they're okay, but you don't really think about them because you didn't have those same experiences. So the question really lies is, are you having those experiences with those friends you really care about? Because sometimes, because of social media, you don't, because you're like, oh, I see them all the time, but you don't get to make those new memories to increase the value for each other. So
Yeah. I mean, we talked very positively about that interaction with the fox and the idea of being tamed, but also, there's the other side of it, because the
oh
fox
yeah,
mentions you're responsible for what you've tamed. So
yeah,
once you make friendships with someone, if you're a true friend, you can't really kind of forget about them. They can't go back to just being a stranger that you don't
yeah.
really care what happens with them. But also, like, another side of it is now their pain becomes your pain. Like, now if they suffer,
Yeah.
you suffer, and that's kind of sad. It's funny, or maybe not funny, but like very interesting, or captivating, that the fox didn't take the approach of, well, let's not tame or let anyone tame us because it's going to bring pain possibly. He was open to that pain, and he even told the little prince, I might cry when you leave me.
Yeah. Yeah.
But that's, it was a good trade-off according to him.
Yeah.
It was it was the best decision.
And I think I concur with the fox. I think that I agree. I agree completely. I think that vulnerability is the scariest thing to do, but it's also the most freeing thing if you choose to do it. Um, I think I wrote that as one of the quotes actually. People have forgotten this truth, but you mustn't forget. You become responsible forever for what you've tamed. You're responsible for your rose. I, I think the trade off, you always get more, in my opinion, of a good friend than you can ever give them. That's how I feel. That's how I feel. Um, and if you're so worried about the end, you'll never enjoy the now.
Yeah.
You know, if you, and that goes with relationships. That's the risk of getting married. Like, the fear is like, what if my wife gets sick or in a car accident, or like the pain I'm gonna go through is gonna be the worst, right? Like, that's a scary
Yeah.
thought, but that thought shouldn't stop you from, at least in my opinion,
Yeah.
from
I
being
mean,
vulnerable and enjoying the relationship.
marriage is a great, it fits into a lot of the lessons you kind of go over in The Little Prince. But also, I think as a pet owner, the idea of, you know, having a pet, someone that's attached to you, that you're responsible for. But it's also interesting, like, it takes you back to the rose, because you can kind of argue that humans are unique, or that they have a personality. They're all different. When
Mm-hmm.
it comes to dogs, I have a golden retriever, and I can go to a park and find a lot of golden retrievers that look very similar to my golden retriever,
Yeah.
and I'm gonna like them. They're beautiful golden retrievers too, but they're not my golden retriever. They're not Bruno. They're not the one I have a
Yeah.
relationship with. No one really has a dog as a puppy, or at least no good person that I know has a dog as a puppy. And then at 5 years old decides, you know what, this one's old. I'm gonna get a new one. I'm gonna get a new puppy because this one just got old. There's better ones.
That's so sad. Yeah.
You
No.
are responsible for your pet until something tragic happens, unfortunately. But it's a decision you
Yeah.
make, and you're gonna take care of them for the duration of their lifetime. And I think, if you take a certain approach to relationships and friendships, and definitely marriage, of taking care of them, that's maybe what the little prince learned in this journey, that's what
Mm-hmm.
makes it special. It's not that they're different and unique, it's that they're yours. It's your rose, and
Yeah.
it's different than all the other roses because it's yours.
Man, it's just beautiful lessons we learned in The Little Prince, and I can't agree more. I can't agree more. I think it was a great book that we chose. I mean, it's considered a book. I mean, it's a book. It's a book. It's short. You can anyone who wants to read it. It's quite short. You can read it in an evening, with a little coffee. But there's just so much lessons, and I think that you could always this is the type of book that you could read in a year from now, and you'll always get something else out of it, something to
Yep.
apply or reflect on. So my closing thoughts of this book is, do you value your rose? I think that's the question I ponder myself. And if you don't know if it's a yes or no, and maybe self-reflect that like the little prince learned throughout this journey, what makes my rose special, whatever that is. Maybe friendships, your family, your spouse, your dog. It can be anything. But I think pondering on that question, that's what this book made me help me to keep pondering, that will increase the values of my friendships. And maybe sometimes we're like, in my case, I'm speaking to myself, maybe we don't call our friends like we like to, or check up on them. This book makes you realize the value we have to our friends, and you might not have them one day, and if you're not taking advantage of the time you do have them, then one day you might regret really bad, and you can't change it in the future. But you can do something now. You can call someone now to check in on them, call them, do whatever you can to see them. So I think that's what I took out of it. The biggest lesson for me about The Little Prince was that. What about you?
To me, it didn't seem like a cliche, because probably my favorite lesson was one of the main quotes that you brought up, and it's, the idea that you can only see rightly with the heart. Most things that are important are invisible to the eye. As humans, we like to quantify things. We like to assign numbers to it and value. A home is worth this much, and a job gets paid this much a year.
Yeah.
And we can get caught up on all those numbers and all those details. But at the end of the day, the things that matter the most, like about a friend, is not really his job or what he does, like the things that you can quantify. It's maybe experiences, things that, you've noticed about their heart. They're very kind. When they see, a certain situation, they react a certain way. And like learning to see those, could be little things, is really more important than seeing those things that are maybe more visible and more openly out there. And that's what I take. And I mean, like you said, The Little Prince is such a small, short, maybe even child-friendly book. Yet at the same time, any adult, and regardless of what life they're living, can draw a lot of important lessons from it. And and that's the journey that we're trying to embark in. Trying to find different books, different lessons that we can gain, and what they teach us about our life. Because at the end of the day, like, that's really what we want to improve our day to day.
Yeah, exactly. So thanks to everyone who's listened thus far. It was our first episode. Thank you guys for joining in, and hopefully you got much out of this as we did. Ultimately, this journey, if you're going to join us, is going to be our journey of lessons we're getting from whatever book, content, articles, movies, whatever we're going to be analyzing, to see how this affects us and how we can keep growing a little bit and bettering ourselves. So if there's anything that you relate to, feel free to share that with us, and any suggestions of books, we would take them as well. And again, thank you for listening in. And any last words, Carlos?
All right, I think you summarized it pretty well. See you next time, and we'll see what journey we embark in after the Little Prince. She was about 85 years old, and she came to visit here in the US, and I was in this German class, and one of the students asked her, like, what's your favorite book? And this was her favorite book. In German. I think it's Der Kleine Prinz, I think she called it. So I looked it up, and sure enough, it's widely translated. So I picked up a copy in English or Spanish. I don't know which one. I think it was in English. And that's kind of like when I fell in love with the book. So like, it was introduced to me by someone that was 85 years old.
Wow.
And that kind of just speaks. Because this person was a reader, I think, and she mentioned many. But I think that's why we asked her what her favorite book was, because she mentioned that's one of her passions: drinking wine and reading books. And we asked her why. We obviously didn't know about wine. We were in high school. We wanted to know what her favorite book was, and that was it. And the fact that she was 85 years old and probably read her entire life, and yet this book was her favorite. Kind of like made me interested. I was like, oh, if this person that's 85 years old loves this book and it's probably read a lot more books than I have, let's give it a shot. And that's kind of where it happened.
You fell in love with it. Yeah, I mean, it must have been impactful, right? It must have been impactful to see, you know, again, someone that's no doubt consumed a lot of books, read a lot of books, to say that this children's book was his favorite.
Yeah,
that's pretty crazy.
Maybe she achieved it. Maybe she managed to stay a child or keep that inner child alive. And who knows?
That's awesome. Yeah, and I remember you introducing it to me. I think you might even share the story when you. I'm pretty sure you did. I remember being in your car. I think it was like after like we just got some Starbucks probably or something. And I think you told me this experience about this book, and I'm like, let me try it. Again. Like I'm not an avid reader, so I was like, yeah, sure, why not? And I was like, wow, this is really good. I was impacted. So I'm glad that this was
yeah.
I'm just a copycat, bro. I've been trying to copy you all my life.
What's your book? The Steal Like an Artist? That's your life.
Bro, that's literally my way of living. Bro, that should be our next book. That should be, dude, that's a great book. That's a great
Steal
book.
Like an Artist. Yeah. I don't think I read it. We could do it. Let's do it.
Read it? Oh, bro, it's.
I don't think so.
It's super. I mean, short. It's short. It's short, sweet, but like I don't know. I got a lot of value as someone. I mean, I'm not an artist, but someone who likes to create. I think that I value it a lot, and then I recommend it for anyone who feels like they're not creative. I think it's a great book.
Which is me. So let's do it. Cool.
Next week then, Steal Like an Artist.
Let's do it.